share and things like that in the past. So
Definitely.
we're looking at utilizing those funds to, generate additional parking options in our downtown. That
Right, no,
may
it just
not
wasn't
be
clear to me, because I
spots.
thought I was buying something for my $10,000, but I'm not. That was the part that was missing on me.
Okay, I see.
It's
Yeah.
a penalty versus yeah.
Well,
It's
it
more
goes
of a-
into
Sort
a
of,
fund.
an investment.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking, okay, so I own that parking spot and it cost me $10,000. I was trying to figure out where the real estate was, but there isn't any real estate.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank
That's
you.
right. Yeah, and as we see Nelson densify further and further, there'll be more need and more interest in creating these, larger, more complicated, more intensive parking structures, which can cost upwards of $50,000 per space. So this is something, kind of a small step that the city can take to help maintain a bit of unit affordability when you only have to pay $3,000 for a parking space that may not necessarily be actually required.
Just listening to some of this conversation, I don't know if you've seen this elsewhere, but this will be the question. Do we ever envision these fees as being time shifted and maybe reoccurring as opposed to an upfront cost? Does any municipality that you're aware of look instead of maybe charging, say $300 a year in perpetuity on that particular development as assigned to its property taxes, so that over time we could accumulate sufficient funds to actually improve some of the parking infrastructure around?
Yeah, I've only seen it in other municipalities as a lump sum that's paid up front. That could be an option. It may come into conflict if the property ever changes hands and someone is paying for a space or paying for parking that they, never had the chance to provide, or, didn't design the building as they would have in the past. So it's making essentially other people down the road potentially responsible for paying those fees. Rather than just paying a lump sum when the building is designed.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, of course, we could structure it to still go after that $10,000, but it could be in a payment plan that might span over the course of 20, 30 years, as opposed to trying to go down for $3,000 at the start, therefore having more money to invest in these infrastructure pieces.
Yeah, and I think that is a good point. But I think in the grand scheme of things, the price of providing and building a parking space is going to be significantly more expensive than paying this fee regardless. So that usually doesn't seem to be a big deal for people.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think, as Matt said, especially a strata building, so some strata owners have parking stalls, so now we're probably charging that to the strata. The strata kind of figures out who they charge it to. So I think that's why the developer, it's a choice of the developer at the front end and make those business choices as opposed to tenants of that building longer term and what's fair to them. So I think that's why the structure upfront versus ongoing. If it was a rental building that was owned long term and that was part of your cost of that building, that'd be different. Strata building would be quite difficult to make that work.
And we haven't had a whole lot of uptake on this yet, but this example here, this graphic shows probably the most likely scenario where we'll see probably the most uptake. So we can see a single detached house here on a property outlined in the light blue. For instance, if this property wanted to install a secondary suite or a basement suite, they would be required to add an additional space on their property. As we can see with the dark blue line there, which shows the dimensions of a standard parking space, we obviously can't fit a parking space on the property here. So they may want to site it in that red rectangle where they may have to remove that tree, change their landscaping, increase the size of their curb cut, which is a lot more intensive, or they could pay the $3,000 cash in lieu fee and park on the driveway as they normally would. So that's probably the most recognizable situation we'll see this occur.
So Matt, how does that, as an example, we talk about affordability and we're trying to connect the two together here. I'm not 100% sure that it works, but how does that create affordability? Because somebody's renting a place, they're renting it at market, regardless.
Definitely. Yeah, the affordability piece I'm thinking more of in the downtown area where we're talking high density, where we're trying to, or maybe we need to build like a larger, more intensive parking structure with like 50 parking spaces or something that cost a significant amount, that cost $20, $30, $40,000 per parking space, and then obviously that just gets passed on to the resultant purchaser of that unit of within that building. So that's how the affordability piece works for this. But in another format, for this kind of lower density scale, paying $3,000 may seem relatively feasible compared to, you know, altering your curb cut, you know, hiring a landscape designer to redo your landscape, hiring a contractor, hiring an arborist to get rid of that tree. It seems like a lot of those fees would add up, and people may rather just pay that $3,000 to reduce that requirement.
Just park on the street like they always have.
Yeah, or that. That's true.
It also avoids a variance in this case, right? A
That
lot
as
of
well.
people don't wanna, you know, in this case would require variance, or the alternative is to pay the cash in lieu. And a variance is $500, the community notices, its time, its potential to throw in a lot of NIMBYism in the mix. And so we feel that this is an option. And I want to mention, and we're not changing those other options, there's a bunch of different alternatives to providing parking on site, and they vary and they have different rules. So this is just another tool within what we offer residents in terms of when parking doesn't necessarily make sense on site.
Yeah.
But just the 10,000 is there, it just has never worked, and we felt through this review that it maybe lowering the fee and expanding it might be something that we could use. And it also offers maybe somebody developing a new dwelling with a suite in it and are required 3 parking stalls, but they're a single car family and they only want 2 and they prefer to pay the $3,000. And you know, it's kind of forcing that habit change. If we're forcing people to create parking that they don't need, then maybe they will fill that space with a car. I know that's kind of a theory, but I think it's changing the you know, the conversation, and you know, people can use that space for you know, it's green space, it's better stormwater management, heat islands, and all those things. So it all kind of fits into the larger picture of what we're doing.
And given the topography of a lot of the area, a lot of parking structures do end up, you know, having to hire an engineer to design some kind of retaining wall, which, you know, ends up being a lot more costly than maybe they even needed it to be in the first place. So
I think from just the affordability angle alone, just the cost angle, there's just that opportunity cost of people who would be like, am I going to lose my green space at my home for that secondary unit, right? That flexibility makes sense to me, that then it is more attractive because you're just dealing with the unit at that point, and maybe someone has room for off-street parking because it's way up in the top of Rosemont somewhere where it's not a congested area, but at least you don't have to consider taking down a beautiful tree and what limited green space you might have in those situations. So more opportunity.
And I think the flip side is we don't want everyone not developing off-street parking on their site. So I think this is trying to find that balance of developing that off-street parking where it makes sense and allowing that flexibility where, you know, it's, whether it's topography or the site or whatever, then there's flexibility to, you know, not do that. But if we had no charge, then no one's gonna, you know, develop off-street parking because that is a cost, and we're gonna have more and more vehicles on streets and make it more challenging for us to plow streets and manage traffic and have neighborhood complaints and all of that. So I think we're trying to find that balance there.
yeah, moving on to our third bylaw
Matt,
amendment.
before you leave there, just
Sure.
the one thing that, I'm not suggesting for a moment you're on the right track here, but the one thing that's always sort of concerns me when we make these shifts is it gonna put people off developing a suite, as an example? You know, I just pulled up this report here from the minister, from Victoria, Seniors Advocate, Isabel McKenzie, Seniors Advocate. And they talk about the number of seniors that are actually living on their own, you know, in homes that could easily accommodate a suite or whatever. But maybe, you know, it doesn't say in the article, but I'm thinking every little barrier you put in front of a person to developing a suite, it's one less rental option that happens in your community. And I know as someone that put a suite in their house, it's not an easy thing to do. You know, because once you have it done, you're still not done because you get sewer and water fees. And in fact, there's less people living in our house now than there was when we were raising our family. You know, we have less waste, we have less water, less sewer, whole 9 yards. But these are all, like, I happen to have the luxury of understanding how to go in here and get that done. Plus, I worked in construction my whole life, so it wasn't a barrier to me. But if there's, say, 100 seniors in our community that are living by themselves that might be interested in developing a suite, this is just one more thing that they might see, ah, heck, only got 10 years left anyway, why bother, right? I'm just trying to think, is it a barrier to creating more rental accommodation in residential areas, as an example?
Sure.
Just a thought.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, maybe I'll just chime in here. It's not a barrier, it's just an extra option. It doesn't mean that somebody has to pay $3,000 in lieu of providing parking. It's just it could be a slew of reasons, as Matt mentioned, that creating a parking stall could end up costing you $20,000, $30,000 because you have to do a retention structure and all of that. You don't want to go through a variance process. You don't want to get the neighborhood involved. You can come in and it says, with this, we can give, staff can give the approval with a $3,000 cash in lieu fee to forego that extra parking. So I don't think it's a barrier, it's the opposite. It's another alternative. And we're lowering that price of $10,000 to $3,000. So again, we're making it more of a feasible option.
Okay. Councillor Woodward.
I would only say that as I hear this discussion that, you know, if you're developing a suite and you have a renter and they have a car, like that has to go somewhere. So we have to have some way of organizing that, or else, you know, we fill up the streets with rental unit cars, right? So I just feel like this, you know, something has to be done. There has to be some rule of what to do with a renter's car. So I do feel like this really gives.
So that doesn't apply though to all buildings, because you know, we relaxed the parking requirements. We already did that on Victoria Street. So does that mean that everybody that buys a suite in there is going to not have a car?
No, I think again, this is an option. There are many options where we can consider various ways to not have a parking stall that already exists. All we're doing here is we're lowering the fee to provide, you know, this as a more feasible way of maybe providing parking. And this example exactly is showing that there's all that blacktop that can probably fit 2-3 vehicles, but because most of that is on our city right away, we can't consider it as a parking stall even though it physically works. So this is just saying, you know, instead of going through the variance process, you can go through this route, or you can go through the variance process, or you can potentially use something else depending where your property is situated. If it doesn't have on-street restricted parking, there's other options there. So,
And our parking requirements are still very much in place. This is really kind of like a last resort option that people can come to. It's still very much the first stop is, okay, here's how many parking spaces you need to fit that on your property. If you're going to put in a suite and you're going to have a renter, you need to provide parking for them. And then somewhere down the line, if we decide to agree that, okay, it's not feasible for this specific property, here's an option you can take. So our requirements are still very much in place.
Jonathan.
So now we've talked about it too long, so now I'm confused. I'm looking at this picture here. So when I pay my $3,000, can my renter now park on the blue line?
Yes, exactly.
You're basically
Okay,
buying
so
parking
basically I'm buying,
space.
so now I'm buying some real estate. This time I'm buying some real estate. I'm buying the easement at the front of my home.
But in 50 years, if that road needs to be widened, you- that you're no guarantee. So that's why we were very hesitant to kind of use that space as a, oh, this is my parking, because we do get some of these properties that have been developed 80 years ago, 60 years ago, and the parking is on City Boulevard, and we're trying to reclaim it for whatever reason, and then we're kind of getting a bit of a clash. So that's why this is it seems very much a technicality, but it is done that way to make sure the process is transparent. And down the road, Matt and I aren't gonna be dealing with it, but somebody else may be dealing with this, because, you know, we're dealing with stuff that was decided 50, 60 years ago all the time. It's just a reality. And one more thing, let's not forget that according to census data, 30% of our population commutes to work via active transportation. So, I mean, again, these are things where people are developing new homes. Things are changing. It's going to take a while, but we're planning for what we want to see in 30 years. And some people might not want to create that extra blacktop that they have no intention of using. So, I mean, these are all steps that are going towards, you know, what the data is pointing to us. So we have to look at the big picture here.
And those folks need end of trip facilities.
And the funding needs to come from somewhere, and this is an option for it. If you choose to, if you're not a user of a vehicle, but you're a user of a sidewalk or bike route or whatever, well, this is a way to contribute to it.
Thank you.
Okay. Our third bylaw amendment is making some alterations to our small car only parking regulations. We can see in Nelson, we have a growing number of small car vehicles or vehicles that are fitting within that small car footprint. We can see from 2016 to 2020, we can see a growing number from this ICBC data, a growing number of small vehicles versus a reducing number of large vehicles, which is resultant in a growing percentage of small cars within our community. And therefore, we're proposing to both reduce the size of small cars from 5.3 meters to 4.8 meters, while also increasing the number and the ratio of that small car parking spaces may take up for total parking requirements for development. They also result in a bit more functionality when we do end up designing those larger parking structures. They end up in a bit more efficiency and a bit more just better use of those parking areas. We can see that this brings us a bit more in alignment with some other communities, reducing that from 5.3 meters to 4.8 meters for a small car parking space dimension. It's even a bit more conservative. We can see that some common vehicles within Nelson, like a Subaru Forester and a Toyota RAV4, still fit quite well within that 4.8 meter footprint.
And again,
That's the minimum. If a developer wants to build 5.3, they can build 5.3. So we're not
course.
restricting how big they can be, just that they must be, the
That's
minimum.
right. Number 4, parking permits for long vehicles. This one is quite straightforward. Essentially, the city just doesn't have a mechanism right now that allows staff to deny parking permits if a resident were to bring in, a bus or an RV or something like that applying for a parking permit, they would still technically be eligible for that. So it's about building a bit more on-street parking equity and maximizing our on-street parking stock, which is, one of the overarching goals of the downtown parking strategy as a whole. So setting that recommended limit of 6.5 meters in length, anything longer than that would be ineligible for an on-street parking permit.
So Matt, just to be clear on that, what does it mean about should not be permitted to park for duration longer than designated time?
Yeah, so that would be where you would be permitted and eligible to come in and get a parking permit to park within one of those timed areas. So 2 4-hour parking, you would be able to come in and get a complimentary residential parking permit, which would allow you to park in those areas for as long as you like. But vehicles longer than 6.5 meters would not be eligible for that.
Would not be eligible?
That's correct.
You can't park your motorhome there,
Yeah.
resident.
So when we have, as example, I could probably point you out 6 trailers that are sitting on the street right now, or motorhomes. People are here for a 2-week holiday, they have to come and get a permit, is that what you're saying?
Nope, this is just for complementary residential permits. So this is just in areas in the city where we have residents abutting timed parking areas on the street, so 2 4-hour parking areas. And people are required to come in and get a parking permit for that.
Timed areas.
That's correct.
Outside of that, it's the Wild West.
You bet.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, exactly.
In theory, the traffic bylaw will say that
Yeah.
you shouldn't park your vehicle for more than 72 hours in
Yeah.
one space,
Yeah.
right? So,
Exactly, yeah.
so we do have that control if, for other situations where
Okay, thank you.
see some abuse there.
Our 5th bylaw amendment is regarding parking permits for multi-unit buildings. So in a similar fashion, so we're proposing that those same complementary residential parking permits will only be eligible for multi-unit buildings with no more than 6 dwelling units. So any multi-unit building with greater than 6 dwelling units will not be eligible for parking permits, or complementary residential permits to park on the street. So essentially this is kind of the flip side of the coin of providing these parking relaxations. So if we were to provide parking relaxations for a development, and then we have tenants who don't have parking spaces, but they're still eligible to get a residential parking pass to park on the street, that's essentially just passing that responsibility onto the city to provide those parking spaces for those tenants. And we can see that occurring at 401 Silica Street, for an example. We have a multi-unit building with 21 residential units in it. They have 9 off-street parking spaces. So essentially, as it stands today, they're currently eligible for upwards of 12 on-street parking permits. So that's putting the responsibility on the city to provide that parking. So it's kind of the flip side of the coin of providing those relaxations. Now we need to make sure that, okay, we are actually getting our developers to provide the adequate parking, because if they don't, the tenants aren't going to be able to get parking permits and park on the street. So we need to make sure that we have that balance there. And this is also part of just, maximizing our on-street parking stock. It's not fair to the rest of the public if everyone else from that dwelling or everyone else from that multi-unit building is just able to get parking permits, and that creates a lot of congestion. So we're seeing this trending in some other municipalities as well. Calgary, Kelowna, Penticton are all making similar efforts in this regard.
And I think
That goes hand in hand with relaxing parking requirements in the downtown. We're quite fine to relax those, but we're not backstopping your choice not to add off-street parking. If you think you only need 20 stalls for 30 units, then fill your boots, but don't expect us to provide the other 10 parking stalls.
Exactly. And our 6th bylaw amendment is the creation of winter-only parking permits, which is also relatively simple. Essentially, we just have a few kind of piecemeal areas within the city where we have some, historical properties that only are accessed via the lane. Just how our crews operate in the winter when we're at peak snow and ice buildup, they prioritize clearing on our local streets over the lanes. So the property or the residents of those properties that are unable to access their property via the lane are therefore forced to park on the street, and they shouldn't be getting penalized for that and getting ticketed by parking on the street when they're unable to access their property. So this will essentially just enable them to come in and get a winter parking permit from us to park on the street between December through February, and that will give them access to do that until the city is able to clear the lane and they can access their property. And
Sorry, I just have a question about your recommended time period there.
Sure.
Because although probably 1st of December is okay, I think that you need another month at the other end, because I'm not a climatologist, but what I have seen is that we have this shift in weather that seems to be moving moving that way through the calendar. And I've seen some pretty horrific snowstorms in the past in Nelson in the month of March, February, March, some of the best skiing at the ski hill, which means that it's probably quite a bit of snow in the city. So I just think your time frame there is too short if you're going to embed that those dates in the bylaw.
Okay. Yep, we could look into that a bit more if that's what council would like. Those are generally and historically the months that we've received the most snow, and that's just what we base that off of. But that can be altered, and we decided that December through February just seemed like the most prudent amount of time. 3 months, providing, adding more months on either side might, cause a bit more congestion on the local streets more than necessary. Yeah, but it's something we could do.
So Matt, maybe we can put language where, staff has the authority to extend those in the event of unusual snow events or something that.
Well, having, you can have stats on when you have a snowfall, but that sometimes has very little bearing on how much snow you have.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yep.
we can have
Yeah.
2 feet of snow on the ground in the middle of March, and we haven't had a snowfall since the middle of February.
Yeah.
Right, so
Right.
you still can access your lane. Before I go to Councillor Page, the other question I'd have there is, a lot of this stuff you'd have to be a certain amount of monitoring would have to be done. What about the numbers of vehicles that could qualify for that permit as an example? How would you, I don't know how you'd sort of work that, because it'd be a pretty good deal for most people to get a permit to park on the street, which in turn, if Colin Ennis was sitting where you are right now, he'd be asking us to get cars off the street in that time of year, right? So I'm just wondering how that sort of, in fact, he has done that. I'm just wondering how that sort of fits with that plan.
Yeah, I can definitely appreciate that. The thing is, it's about building a bit more parking equity when people are physically unable to access the parking on their property that, they've paid for and they've designed, and they're paying taxes to have that lane cleared, but yet our crews have just been unable to clear it. They shouldn't then be forced to park on the street and be getting ticketed for that. That's essentially all this is doing.
And Matt, that's in our restricted zones again, right?
That's right. Yep. So
It's
it's
not in the city as a whole.
very
This is-
limited properties are actually being impacted
Yeah.
by this. Yeah.
So you have off-street parking on Bell Street, but you can't access it in the winter. We will issue a residential pass now. Other people on that street that don't have off-street parking are already getting residential passes, right?
Exactly.
So-
And they would have to demonstrate that to staff, that there is significant difficulty reaching their property, that of course they only have access via the lane. Anyone with a driveway or any other access off of the local street would not be permitted for this.
Because the lanes are kept open for waste management, right, for
Right.
collecting garbage and so forth.
Definitely.
Councillor Page.
Yeah, and listening to this discussion, I'm just wondering, I guess I've got fee structure on my mind if we want to consider having these divvied out in 2-month stints. So you could get a set fee and you can decide to get it from November to December, or you can decide to get it from November, December, January, February. And if you actually desire, you can go for a full 6 month to take you into March and April, or you may get halfway through the winter and decide you need to pick one up in December and carry it. But in that way, it's not a winter parking pass for the winter, but instead 2-month blocks of winter passing, that if you want to keep stacking them up and you want to pay the fees that go with them, then you can kind of shape it to fit your desire at that time. And you're provided the opportunity to then extend it, which some people will fall away as that kind of gets in and through the season, and other people might take advantage of it.
Yeah, and we really want this to be, a last resort, because we don't want people to be taking advantage of this unless they absolutely have to, because like we're saying, we're trying to get fewer cars, or we're trying to get more cars off of our local streets and using their parking on their property. So, and this isn't something we're exactly going to be advertising by any means. It's more so just, okay, someone absolutely needs this because they physically can't access their property, okay, we can make an exception here with this permit and you can park on the street for 3 months.
The longer the slide stays up, the more.
Advertising you're doing.
I was just gonna say, and you've labeled the streets wrong, and so just, not, you know, sorry.
So the other thing to.
Close enough.
But they're close enough, but you're 1 block off going down the hill, so you're missing Victoria there.
The other thing to remember, these are these areas that we have commuters parking in these areas that
Yeah.
these are, this isn't the same equity as, being up at the top of uphill where I can park in front of my house, all day long. This is other people, preventing me from, like everybody else. So these are, and are we charging a fee for residential parking passes? No. So this is in recognition of that street being used as commuter parking and trying to create some access for the residents of that street.
And one thing that would be important to mention is that these neighborhoods are quite unique, where most of the properties don't have driveways fronting on the road, and it is quite unique that it creates a very unique streetscape. It creates a pleasant, pedestrian, and safe environment. We are getting a lot of pressures from people wanting to punch driveways through, and a lot of them are saying, well, winter I can't access my lane, but you're not letting me punch a driveway through, which we're discouraging because it's a heritage thing, and it's a tax transportation thing. So this provides an option in those cases. So we don't want to be pegged in the corner of having to give people driveways because a couple of weeks in the winter time it's a bit complicated for them. This is an alternative. Again, these are just bits and pieces, but they all kind of fit into the larger puzzle when it comes to managing growth in the city.
Thank you.
Excellent. And here we just have a handful of future implementation items that we'll be looking into. Introducing parking permit fees, exploring commuter parking options, reviewing parking fines, increasing payment method variety, EV charging, things like that. And here are our 6 bylaw amendments, if anyone has any further comments on them.
Good job. Thanks very much. Any questions or comments before we get to of Matt or Sebastian? No? Okay, so we have a list of recommendations here. We have to do them one at a time.
I'll move one.
Okay, moved by Councillor Page, second by Councillor Lochtenberg, that the off-street parking and landscape amendment bylaw number 3553 2022 be introduced and read a first and second time by title only. All in favor? Thank you. Number 2. Moved by Councillor Lochtenberg, second by Councillor Woodward, that the off-street parking landscape amendment bylaw number 3553 2022 be read a third time by title only. All in favor? Thank you. And number 3.
Move.
Councillor Morrison, Councillor Renwick, that the traffic amendment bylaw number 3554 2022 be introduced and read a first and second time by title only. All in favor? Carried. And last but not least,
Move for.
Councillor Morrison,
Second.
Councillor Woodward, that the traffic amendment bylaw number 3554 2022 be read a third time by title only. All in favor? Thanks, everybody. Thanks very much, you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, everyone.
Are you sticking around for the next one, or are you done? Mural one?
That wasn't a request. Veiled in something
The
else.
next one is the mural permit guideline policy, which is a great idea. Staff and the Cultural Development Committee have recommending that council amend the mural development permit guidelines policy to address the decommissioning of murals, and proposed revised policy is now presented to council in a request to adopt the revised policy. Probably long overdue and a great idea. Councillor Page, Councillor Lochtenberg,
I have a question.
comment, okay?
A comment or a question? So obviously we had some situations earlier this year where the decommissioning came up, as obviously the report speaks to, and creating clarity around that. I know it is our standard practice for murals in the last, decade or so have had these kind of baked in. At least the stuff that's been going through the Mural Festival has, is my understanding. But my question here is, I was having a conversation with a local designer who has been around for a fair amount of time and kind of considers himself an expert in some of these spaces. And it was leading us to a place of discussing how some of this wall space might actually be put back to fallow, as opposed to necessarily being one mural after another mural, and they don't get decommissioned until there's a new one in the chute. And how the murals themselves can be an activity that we use to try and brighten and enliven spaces, but sometimes, a consequence of focusing on how some of the other places, some other components of the setting of our town can be invested in, and that there's an opportunity sometimes from a design perspective to put things back to flat, to put things back to what the building looks like before coming back to consideration for a mural. And I wanted to take the space of this piece to kind of see if there was some discussion that council wanted to have on that kind of idea, that maybe part of how we want to decommission these things is have them go their 10 years or whatever seems appropriate. But maybe after that, they get painted back to the appropriate color for that building and they sit empty for 5 years to see what the streetscape might look like without a vibrant mural that's inviting your attention, and let people refocus their attention into the set and place of those particular streets, and reorient ourselves in what it means to be beautifying our city.
Not a bad point. Go ahead, Councillor Woodward.
I'd say a lot of that would depend on the building owner.
Mm-hmm.
So
Perhaps.
Council has some part in that, but at the end of the day, it's the building owner that might want a mural after a mural, and that's their choice.
And I'd also just add, that was one of the reasons the CDC was formed and created guidance for them, that council felt they weren't the experts on, that subject. And, this policy says they would develop a decommissioning removal process. Maybe part of that removal plan is, in this building, we won't add another mural. So I think that discussion is probably best at the CDC and use those, that expertise at that level versus probably here.
Yeah, the murals actually started because of the graffiti. That was the beginning of the concept to go with, because studies had shown that if you have a mural, Lions Park was an example, the walls of Lions Park, put a mural on it, and they haven't had graffiti on it. Yeah. Maybe once, they've had.
And it was part of our downtown design strategy of, enlivening our laneways, and, that was lighting and murals and other things to enliven those spaces. And so I think
It's not a bad point, though, and I think, Kevin, you probably cleared it
yeah,
up
I just think
somewhat,
probably CDC would be the right, and, development services in terms of that, downtown plan, and, how does that all fit together? Because they're looking at that whole, urban landscape, and so probably between the two of them, developing, what that looks like.
This is a good first step, that's for sure. So, Councillor Emmerich, do you have your hand up?
Yes, thank you.
And then Councillor Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the way this reads, if I'm a building owner and I have a mural on there, this is your signature on here, right, Sebastian?
No.
Isn't it? Oh, damn it.
That's
Sorry.
It's Gabe.
It's Gabe. Oh.
Pass the back.
That doesn't mean that Sebastian doesn't have the answer.
And let's say I want to decommission it as per Councillor Page's.
To fallow it.
Yes. It says here, including the terms agreed upon by the building owner and artist who is responsible for the decommissioning / removal process.
And who.
Pardon me?
And who is responsible.
Doesn't say that here in the background.
Oh,
It says,
the report.
so I'm reading this like the artist is going to buck up for some of the decommissioning. Is that, I'm assuming that's incorrect. He did paint it after all and got paid for it.
No.
So does he share in the cost of putting it back to
Yeah, no, exactly. In the permitting process, there is, working with Sydney Black, there's criteria in terms of what happens to the mural. And, the mural is said that it's going to be, there's budget in there to maintain it for up to 10 years. But for example, if the building owner after 2 years, or it changes ownership and they said, I'm not into it, I want to repaint it, that's totally up to them. And it is up to them to cover the costs of bringing it back to whatever they want it to be. But the agreement they have with the mural is that it be maintained for up to a period of 10 years. So does that answer the question?
And
Really, because it says here, I'm a building owner, it says the owner and the artist are responsible.
Councillor Renwick, just to clarify, the way I'm reading this is a decommissioning removal plan, including the terms agreed upon by the building owner and artist, and who is responsible for the decommissioning removal plan. So that needs to be included as part of the application. It's not indicating that the artist would be responsible for the decommissioning or removing the mural. It's just indicating that at the outset, when a permit is requested for a mural, this needs to be included, so that essentially it's future looking, so that we are agreeing at the outset who is responsible to remove the mural or decommission it. It doesn't necessarily have to be the artist or the building owner. It could be NDAC or another proponent for the mural, but it would just settle this ahead of time so we don't end up in a situation where 8, 9, 10 years down the road, there's not any clarity on who's going to take the mural down or who's going to continue maintaining it, just that type of thing. So this is just another component that's going to be included in an application.
Or,
Janice was first.
I've got a word.
or there's misunderstanding between the artist and the
One word.
building owner that, at the end of 10 years, that artist has agreed, yes, I understand my mural is going to be removed at the end, or potentially removed at the end of that 10 years.
Or before.
Yeah, yeah, whatever that decommissioning plan is, then, the artist has signed off, yeah, I'm okay, I understand that, my
just
mural
add
may
one
be
word?
removed and you don't
One
make
word.
this expectation that we had on another one, that it was there forever. And I think that's a big component of this as well.
Okay, no,
Morrison was next, but you have one word.
Further,
Further, okay.
I would like
Councillor
to,
Morrison. No, it's 2
I would
words.
like
It's 3
to
words.
amend the policy to say, and further, who is responsible.
I think there needs to be a little more clarity there. I read that like, right?
Councillor Renwick, I see the ambiguity you're pointing out. I think Councillor Page's proposal would clarify that. That is something we could do on the fly here if that is what council would like to see.
Councillor Morrison.
I just in terms of, Councillor Page asked the question about could it be blank or go back to what it was beforehand. When I see design guidelines statement number 5, I see that it's not like you have to ask for a process to have your building painted back to what it was beforehand. Just because you've had a mural once doesn't mean you're going to have a mural 100 times.
No, I know. Yeah.
So I just like in terms of your question, I'm just curious as to why you brought that up, because it clearly says their murals should be replaced or painted over after 10 years, depending on their state and locations. So there's no guarantee that another mural is going to go up there and that the building would just be returned to whatever the color was or whatever. I don't know that it has to go through any kind of process or back to the CDC or anything like that.
There's a number of murals in town right now. If there's development next door, they're gone anyway.
Yeah, if they and these were, that's why most of them we don't allow them like facing Baker per se. They're in the lane. It's all part of revitalization, and and then it goes into graffiti and all that stuff.
Okay, so Gabe assures me that further is in there. And is that okay? You're okay? on
Yeah,
that?
I'm fine with that, thank you.
So just to Councillor Morrison's comment, it really comes from that value and principle of talking about how we have policies that implement on the urban landscape itself. And so I certainly understand the values of the private property owners and their ability to have autonomy in that space for making those judgment calls that might be appropriate to them. But I think this conversation, what really struck me about it was that overarching value that we might have in order to design policy that was impacting the entirety of the landscape as opposed to the piecemeal effects. And so I thought having that discussion about why we might build in a fallowing period between murals also lets people rediscover what a space was intended by the architects at a time when, you know, you might go year after year, you might go decades where it's just one after another, and you might never know what the street looks like if it's just allowed to be the street that it was originally designed to be. But that's where that comes from.
Thank you. All right, so the recommendation is that the revised City of Nelson Mural Development Permit Guidelines Policy number 45000010 be adopted. Mover, Councillor Renwick, Councillor Charwood. Questions or comments? Hearing none. All in favour? Thank you very much, both of you. Good
Thanks,
job.
man.
Long
Thank you.
overdue.
Thanks. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for getting
Thanks, guys.
All right, reports, information and correspondence. First ones up are accounts payable, purchasing, etc.
I'll move.
Well, the Rusty Moose has gone now that Colin's away.
I'll second that.
Move.
I'll second. First, move second.
All in favour? Thank you. Minutes from the various Cultural Development Committee, Public Library. Any comments there from anybody? Move receipt, please. Moved by Councillor Charwood, second by Councillor Renwick. All in favour? Thank you. Letters to the UBCM. And
I'll move that, Mayor.
move receipt.
Move receipt.
Councillor Woodward, Councillor Renwick, all in favour? Carried. No actions coming out of there. Thanks very much. No notice of motions, late items, camera, release to the public. You're going to notify the NEDP. Motion to adjourn. Councillor Lockenberg has hand up right away. Councillor Renwick, second, all in favour? Carried. Thanks very much. All right, we have one more thing to do in the closed meeting. One thing to do in the closed meeting. So thanks very much, Justin.
Yeah.
You don't have to stick around now. You know that little piece of property is right across from the studio.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a patio on it now.
Yes, we have to.